APEC Economic Leaders Week wrapped up in Da Nang, Vietnam. Regional economic integration and growth achieved through partnerships and inclusiveness. Leaders from APEC economies reaffirmed their commitment to a shared future. And CGTN hosted a panel on energy efficiency and sustainable growth. Thank you so much. My great honor to introduce on my very left hand, Her Excellency Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, one of the youngest and vibrant country leaders we have ever seen on this stage. Madam Prime Minister, what a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. And this is going to be one of her very first multilateral platform talk to all of us. Thank you. And also joining us, Mr. Robert Franklin, President of ExxonMobil Gas and Power Marketing Company, and also Vice President of ExxonMobil Corporation. He has been with the company for a long time and certainly been key to bringing the strategic solutions to bring all the resources to different parts of the world. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Welcome. Over there, we also have a wonderful lady, Madam Huong, President of TH Truemilk, otherwise known as Vietnam's Milk Lady. Welcome. Last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Mark Konyn, Group Chief Investor Officer of AIA, who has been working in the Asia-Pacific region for 30 years. So how time flies. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Vietnam has offered a lot of thoughts for all of us when we are here. And I learned a small phrase which is called Gai Ko Bo Gai Kong, meaning think out of the box. Difficulties help you to find talent, intelligence and guidance. I guess we're going to do that. So, Madam Prime Minister, new into the office, so many things to struggle around. You know better than anybody else here sitting. Tell us, where is the issue of sustainable development, resource efficiency on your administration's agenda right now?
Thank you. And can I start by thanking you for the invitation to join you all here today for this important discussion on resource efficiency and sustainable growth. I want to start my contribution today with a statement of fact. Climate change is the greatest challenge facing this generation. It is the greatest challenge. It's also the greatest challenge facing the Asia-Pacific region. New Zealanders are deeply concerned, not just about what is happening to our country, but what is happening to our planet. We are deeply concerned about the state of our environment and how we use our natural resources. Civil society has a huge role to play, but governments play an important role in providing the necessary political leadership. But we can't do it alone. Government and business needs to work together in partnership to get our economic settings and incentives right to enable us to transition to a low-carbon future. Now, this, among many things, means structurally reforming our economies to provide the right set of incentives to drive change, including better and smarter use of regulation to encourage innovation and more efficient use of our resources to benefit all. I want to talk briefly, though, about political leadership. As Prime Minister of New Zealand, it is my responsibility to take a lead role on climate change and using our resources responsibly. That means using all of the evidence and analysis available, getting the best advice and making hard decisions. It's not easy. There will be trade-offs for all of us, but we owe it to ourselves, our children and our future generation. Now, my government is doing just that. We've announced an intention to pass a Zero Carbon Act. We will be putting into law a new goal of net zero emissions by 2050. And we'll also be proposing to establish a climate commission to provide independent advice to the government on climate issues, such as our new goal to transition New Zealand to 100% renewables by 2035. Now, the Paris Agreement represented a turning point for all of us, but we now actually have to provide some action against that agreement. We're already seeing the emergence of new technologies, but we have ways that we can incentivise and encourage that as well. My government's announced our intention to invest $100 million through a new government infrastructure and green infrastructure fund to kickstart private investment in new low-carbon industries by 2020. Agriculture, though, is the single biggest contributor to New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions, agriculture. That makes us unique. That's why we're focusing our research efforts on livestock emissions, including understanding why some cows and sheep naturally emit lower levels of methane, which could inform both our breeding and our selection programs. We also know that tackling climate change creates co-benefits. We shouldn't just talk about the costs, but also the opportunities. For example, the use of precision agriculture technology secures a triple win for higher agricultural productivity, increased climate resilience and lower greenhouse gases. But I've spoken briefly on the need to use our resources more efficiently. My final point. Okay. We have been long-standing advocates on fisheries subsidies reform as well. Harmful fisheries subsidies are a serious problem with negative trade, environmental and development impacts. They're another subsidy that we need to eliminate for the future benefit of us all. Climate change is real. It's happening now. This is not about talking about what we do in the future, but the action that we have the potential to carry as leaders in the business community and the international environment. My challenge to you all is to join us on that journey and leave a legacy we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister. We've seen a Madam Prime Minister not only knowing the challenges, but already have her action plan. That is the most important thing. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Talking about action plan, I need to go to you as well, Mr. Franklin. For businesses, looking at the region, Asia-Pacific, one of the most vibrant regions in the world, but rising middle class, bringing a lot of vitalities to the region. Yet, one could say it puts pressure on the resources of the region as well, particularly for the middle and long term to come. What do you make of that?
Firstly, thank you, Ms. Wei. It's a great pleasure to be here at APEC. When we talk about the resource efficiency and a sustainable growth, Asia-Pacific is perhaps pivotal, and the growth of the middle class here in Asia is an enormous factor as we look out over the next 20 or 25 years. It is true, I believe, that the economic growth of the globe, which is being driven, frankly, by Asia, will increase energy consumption in the Asia region by around 40% over the next 20 to 25 years. And so I think society has some fundamental choices to make in the near term, led in part by government, but also by business. And we face something, I think, of a trilemma. Firstly, we need to find solutions which bring that energy, make it available to populations. It is indeed the provision of energy which improves people's lives. There are still on this planet 1 billion people that have no access to electricity. 1 billion people who have no access to electricity. So that's challenge number one. I think challenge number two is to provide that energy in a way which is affordable for consumers. Which are not affordable for consumers punishes economies around the world, and we've seen that many times over. And then the third challenge, and these aren't in any order of significance, but a third challenge here, the one highlighted by the Prime Minister, is that we need to be able to bring that energy to populations in a way which is respectful of the environmental challenges, including climate change, that we have around the world. So those are the three parts of the dilemma that need to be addressed. And I think there are roles for government in that, roles for business and roles for society in general. I think for government, policies which target in a fair and non-discriminatory fashion what is attempting to be achieved. So if you want to reduce CO2, my corporation has recommended for over a decade that the way to do that is a non-discriminatory carbon tax. That's how you should do it. Looking out at the opportunities that we have, many energy projects, whatever type of energy you're talking about, are multi-decade projects. And another role, I think, for government is to set in place policies and regulations which have some level of stability. It is difficult to plan in a world where regulations change, perhaps not only every election, but oftentimes within every election. So I think there is a role for government in laying out a plan as to how these issues are going to be addressed to meet the three objectives that we have. And then finally, I think we need to look at what achieves the best results for the least societal cost. I would point out, for instance, that it is undoubtedly true that if you look around the world right now and you say what has led to the largest industrial sector reduction in CO2 emissions over the last decade, the answer to that is the substitution of natural gas for coal in the US generation industry. People don't like to hear it, but in practice that has reduced CO2 emissions in the US by more than every photovoltaic panel and every wind turbine that has been erected over the last 10 years. That is not to say that we shouldn't be doing those things, merely to say that we need to be cold-eyed when we look at the facts as to what actions by government and therefore by industry will have the biggest bang for the buck. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. A set of level playing policies together with the governmental policy stability would very much likely to help with the businesses when it comes to dealing with these problems. Let's go to Vietnam. Madam Tai Huong, I always love the nickname you have, the Milk Lady. Help us to understand, in a developing country like Vietnam, in a vibrant economy like Vietnam, how do you look at the issue of energy efficiency and sustainable development? Ma'am.
Here, talking about food security, I want to talk about Mother Nature. And food security and Mother Nature in Vietnam. When we think about food security, we talk about rice, we talk about corn, we talk about the different food sources all over the world. In Asia Pacific, hundreds of thousands of people still face poverty and hunger. Talking about the policy, I think that we should protect the nature so that the land resources and the water resources will be as clean as possible. When talking about policy for production, we should not use measures dampen the healthiness, the health of land. And we are talking about forestry policy. We are talking about organic planting to preserve the purity of water. Let not let the poverty of people leading them to destroy forests. I think that we need to provide sufficient and favorable conditions for the poor people so that they will not be involved in damaging activities. So what I want to share is that Mother Nature, who gives us everything, science and technology can help us in making the products better, in helping us the production process better. But all in all, we need to uphold and need to look at the Mother Nature And I think that those are the things that I want to talk about in terms of policy. We are looking forward to a green, a clean agriculture in order to provide the best quality of agricultural products and high quality products to the world. Thank you very much.
One could easily notice that while the lives of the people here in the Asia-Pacific region have been rising, there's bigger demand for life qualities, and that has a lot to do with what you've been talking about, which is the Mother Nature. Let's go now to Mr. Konyn. Earlier, your colleague, Rob, was also talking about the pressure. I guess the pressure is not just about the middle class rising and bigger demand for better life, more consumption of the energy, but also, what about the middle term? What about the long term? It really has to be a long process that we're looking at. Mr. Konyn.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. Perhaps I can sort of address some of the issues according to three different dimensions as a life insurer and a deployer of long-term capital. So the first is in terms of how we operate within the communities where we're present across the region, and we're present in 18 different markets in Asia. The second is some of the principles we adhere to when we deploy capital, which promote sustainability. And the third really is the work we do with governments to strengthen the financial infrastructure. And all of these have fairly profound relevance to the long-term sustainability of the economies where we operate. So in terms of our business at the micro level, we're in the business of providing individuals with protection against financial hardship. And this is a liberating force within the economies in this region, because without people feeling confident about their future and being able to protect their families and not being reliant on governments, which we know globally, governments will come up short because of budgetary constraints. They're unable, individuals will be unable to make those long-term decisions which improve their life. So it's really working in the communities where we operate, working with the communities, even down to putting in place CSR programs to raise the awareness of the need to plan financially longer term and seek that protection. The second area is how we deploy assets. And I think we've seen globally, and I think Prime Minister of New Zealand has led the way in many ways in this regard, in terms of ESG. So in terms of environment, socially responsible, and a strong regard for governance when you deploy long-term assets. For too long, I think the financial system has disappointed in terms of its responsibility and how it utilizes and deploys capital. And increasingly now, I think you're seeing very clearly in all regions, and now more so in Asia, the need to focus on those long-term issues, such as climate control or awareness of damage we're doing to our environment, the need to be socially responsible, and the need for good governance in running companies so that there is that degree of transparency and trust that is built up within the communities where those companies operate. So increasingly, as we're looking to deploy capital long-term, and when we buy a long-term bond that goes out 25 or 30 years to back our long-term liabilities, we need to be confident that that company is money good long-term. And the way that we can best safeguard the interests of our policyholders and consequently our shareholders is to look at the business models and make sure those business models have sustainability built into them, so the activities of those companies are sustainable. And then maybe just to finish off, the third area is in terms of financial infrastructure, working with governments to focus on liberalization within the economies, to get the rate of return up in those economies, to break down those protective barriers, to encourage foreign capital to participate. And there's a number of good examples here in Vietnam that have occurred in the last 12 months even, where the government has been very progressive in promoting the deployment of international capital here and allowing international investors to participate and repatriate their capital as well after they've made money, which is raising the level of return on equity, which is very, very important.
Have the other three on the panel, all coming from the private sector. they all have raised up a question about what exactly is the role of the government here. Madam Prime Minister, you at the very beginning did address that, but at the same time, people are wondering, with the election cycles, with all of these rhetorics and ideologies going on, will governments be able to make the policy stable? You talk about 2025, I note it down. You talk about 2030, I note it down too, ma'am. But will that be stable policy? How government make sure of that?
You raise an incredibly important point. I absolutely accept that what the business community needs is certainty. You know, yes, we can put in place regulation, and both regulation and incentives to try and drive behaviours which improve our economic, environmental outcomes. But the question will be, do we invest in that area? Do we change the way we work in our practices? If we don't have certainty that in the long term that will be a policy or a goal that will remain in place. So that, I accept that's a challenge. We have to take the politics out of what are fundamentally evidence-based challenges. The debate needs to stop around whether or not indeed man-made climate change exists, so we can move on to a point where we accept the challenge and then collectively take the politics out of the way that we start to address that. Now, one way we can do that is by trying to create some independence around the infrastructure we use. You heard me speak about the Climate Commission. That will be an independent body that holds the government of the day to account on the action it's taking around the goals that are legislated around climate change. That's one mechanism we can use to create some long-term, sustainable practices that endure beyond political cycles. But again, my hope would be that we can take the politics out of climate change because we need that certainty, because we need that long-term commitment.
Just to briefly follow up on that, I have to ask that question. I mean, even if one administration in one country is determined to do a thing, but you do have the others in the world also having impact on your policy, having impact on people's rhetorics.
Yes.
So how can you also rally all your peers in the other governments
Indeed.
to think alike? That's a crucial question.
It is a challenge, and one of the things that we talk about within the Pacific region is both our need to be both advocates and activists.
Yes.
So Kiribati is an example I cannot ignore. Kiribati in the Pacific is already seeing the very real climate effects of climate change as sea level rises come up and lap into villages where previously that was not an issue for those past villages. It is very real for them. Now, they don't need us to just stand on the international stage and talk about them. They need us to take action ourselves. So our commitment is to both be responsible international agents of change, use our voice, but also demonstrate what is possible by using our own New Zealand example of what can be done. That's why things like goals around 100% renewable, why modelling what can be done in agricultural innovation are ideas that hopefully will then, as international members of the community, be able to share with our counterparts.
I see. The can-do spirit, I guess that is here in the Asia-Pacific region. Before I go to the other two gentlemen, may I go to the other lady for now? Madam Tai Kong, I understand, despite the fact that your country is a developing country, you are also investing overseas in the other parts of the Asia-Pacific region. For example, you yourself in Russia. And we also see greater examples, you know, in the other country, other economies like China, like some of the other ASEAN countries going to the developed economies to invest, and in big way. So how much of that is likely to help up your process of sharpening up your ideas and also your practices of sustainable development? Madam Tai Kong.
As we're talking about food security reform, what I realize is in Russia, 1/6 of the area of the world, everyone believes that the weather is harsh. 6 months production every year. That's all that they have. The other 6 months is winter. But my approach is different. The 6 months of hibernation I see that as the gift of, I see the 6 months of hibernation to be the 6 months where the organisms would renew itself so that we can have a clean organic production that nowhere else can have it. Russia has clean water. All we need is to use technology. All we need is to use proper management. Then we will have sustainability. Then we'll be able to produce. Then we'll be able to supply Russia, which is short in milk, short in food, short in vegetable. So this will help, in a way, 500 million people who are still suffering from lack of food in the region. This will also help us to reduce cost. In terms of resources, there's lots of land. So the product that we look to produce, which is cereal, which is milk, we have all that we need. Price is low, cost is low, and this helps us to succeed. In addition, Russia also have a very open policy, very attractive to investors. So this, and Mr. Putin is helping to reform the very great, very kind Russia. That is our experience, and that's what
many of the Russian friends sitting here must be very happy of what you just said. And by the way, thank you for that tip of the farming policies and also the farming practices. Having heard from you, let's hear also from Mark and Rob. I mean, you look at this wonderful lady coming from Vietnam, and also many people you meet, business people coming from the Asia-Pacific region, developing economies particularly. They go out of their ways in order to reach to the bigger market. Do you feel competition here?
Oh yes, I think we have the privilege of competing in about 200 different economies around the world, and the level of competition here in the APEC region is as great as it is anywhere else. No question about that. It has a different feel from many other parts of the globe because in general it is characterized by higher levels of growth than you see in other parts of the developed world, for sure. So we certainly see that. I wanted to come back to this question of policies around the world. I had the good fortune 3 weekends ago, I guess, to spend some time in New Delhi at a symposium organized by Prime Minister Modi, at which he was talking and discussing with industry the challenges they have in energy. And I think it was exactly the challenges that I tried to refer to before, which is not to downplay in any way the climate change challenge, but they also, clearly he has 1.3 billion people in India. They also have an energy availability question. And I'm guessing, for those of you who saw CNN this morning, they also have an air quality issue, which they have to manage. So I think all of those aspects of policy need to be brought to bear. And when I think about competition here in Vietnam, where we have an opportunity for a development we're trying to work, clearly it's a natural gas development because that's my portfolio. But nonetheless, the real alternative to this development, natural gas for power generation, given the rate of growth of energy demand here in Vietnam, is coal. That is the real alternative. It's going to be natural gas or it's going to be coal. And when you look at which of those ticks the most boxes, should I say, in terms of affordability, in terms of air quality, and indeed in terms of CO2, where natural gas produces about half as much CO2 as coal, it looks like a real winner.
Where I come from is China, one of the largest also economies in the world, second largest I would assume now, and biggest population too. What earlier Rob was talking about is exactly my country is facing too. And I want to explain about that as well. There is a consistent contrast between the better demand for better life among the public and the insufficient, unbalanced development of the economy. China has recognized that. That's another example in the Asia-Pacific region. And yet, it has to always struggle with priorities. You know, economic development, growth rate, jobs, and then issues about sustainable development. Now, people try to put all of them together and say we need to have a comprehensive set of solutions, not just think about this here, and then 2 days later we think about another thing. Mark, what about from the business community, the sustainable kind of sets of policies for companies as well, when you are making your commitment for the long term, for the middle term? Mark.
Sustainability is a key aspect of what we do. Our company is 100 years old. Our industry is often considered strategic in terms of economic development. And I think it addresses some of the issues. You talk about competition. Competition is fierce right across the APEC region. In terms of providing insurance services and financial protection, it's not really a question of competing within a fixed market environment. The real challenge we have is growing the market and being able to do that in a way which allows greater, broader participation, which talks to your issue in terms of wealth distribution and allowing fuller participation. And China is a fantastic example which has really embraced the use of technology to drive those productivity improvements, to allow a greater distribution of the types of services that we operate right across the entire nation. And we're seeing that here in Vietnam. We have a wellness program which we call AIA Vitality, which really encourages our policyholders to think long-term about improving their own health. And it's one of those rare, I say rare, but it shouldn't be rare, situations where the interests of the customers align with the interests of the service provider. The healthier our clients are, the longer they live, the better, the happier they are, and actually our shareholders are happier as well, because the less claims we have to endure, particularly as people get into old age. And I think you raise another very important point about emerging economies. Emerging economies, which is largely how this region is made up, barring one or two notable exceptions, they don't have the luxury of time anymore. We've got populations now across the region which are aging. We have challenges coming to us about related to sustainability and respect for the environment. So I think the business community needs to step up, and we can demand, we can request from governments, but I think it's time as well for the business community to show its hand and start addressing some of these issues. In terms of deploying capital, we're looking at, and I hear what Rob says about gas versus coal, but we're looking at very closely now investment in infrastructure and investment in renewable energy in particular across this region as a way forward. We understand that the provision of power is a prescient need in emerging economies, but we have to keep a strong focus on the long-term sustainability of that. And I think now it's about deploying capital longer term, particularly long-term investors who provide that opportunity to be responsible and to look beyond the next 3 or 5 years.
Infrastructure certainly is a very important issue. You see a lot of ideas flying around here, Belt and Road Initiative initiated by China, Eurasian Corridor by Russia, and many other ideas also. They're all very much welcome because they're going to bring a better future. Having said that, though, I really want to come back to Madam Prime Minister. You listened very attentively to your colleagues on the panel, and New Zealand too. You have this crucial issue, making sure the environment is good. Your exports mainly are focusing on agriculture products, as you mentioned earlier. Good air quality, good soil, all these are crucial for you. But when you are struggling with the priorities, as we said at the very beginning, when you are looking at the daily political issues, when you are going to different parts of our constituencies, you have to make sure the policy is round, but at the same time, very focused. Madam Prime Minister.
I think the key is to no longer see these as distinct issues, but start looking at our development and growth and our economic agenda and our environmental agenda as one. And certainly within a New Zealand context, we see the link, because we've always been a nation that has taken great pride in the focus and emphasis we've placed on our environment, at the same time want to prevent environmental degradation as we continue to grow some of our exports in that area. They two don't have to be mutually exclusive, and that's our challenge, that's our focus.
Will technology really help? Is the fundamental issue
Yes.
technology, as Mark earlier raised? Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do believe it has the ability to help if the incentives are in the right place. I think probably one of the concerns that I was expressing in my introductory comments were at the moment if we have incentives that are in the area, for instance, of fossil fuels, rather than incentives, and some of those incentives will be based around at least properly pricing carbon. Unless we have those incentives in the right place, why is there's no encouragement for there to be that agricultural innovation, for that to be the technological innovation in the way of offsetting and mitigating the effects of climate change. So we have a role to play in creating the settings and the environment in which the business community then responds. I did want to make one final comment in response to the panelists. I absolutely acknowledge we are not blind to the fact that we are talking about climate change within a context of there being both developed and developing nations. And nations where politically the demand, of course, is to lift the living standards of their people. That includes access to energy, issues of energy poverty. I certainly understand the complexity of those competing demands on those nations. But some of our developing nations are also the ones who will feel the brunt of climate change first. So we have to find a way through together, and it's certainly not the case where I think we suddenly, as developed nations, have found our conscience on climate and now are making demands of others. We have to work collectively to understand those other political challenges, those issues of social inclusion and environmental issues.
Technology in whose hands? Also very important. Right? Microphone, please.
A lot of discussion, particularly this week, around trade of manufactured goods. But I think the agenda also includes the way we utilize data, we exchange data and information, and we protect intellectual property. So I think these are key aspects which we need to see a lot of progress and a lot of collaboration around. So when you say technology and in whose hands, it's about enabling the economy. It's not just about disruption. It's about improving productivity. Ultimately, particularly in a country like Vietnam or other emerging economies in this region, it's about raising the return on investments that's going to attract that foreign capital. We know that the banking system needs recapitalizing. How are we going to get to a point where the international community feels confident in order to support that?
We have less than 5 minutes. Let's open it to the floor. And I'm sure there are smarter questions coming from the floor by our guests than my questions earlier. So please feel free to raise up your hands, and our staff will bring the microphone to you.
I'm George Yun. I am UN Task Force on Banking and Finance. What I'm interested is ESG in relation with geopolitics. Because in this part of the world, there is a lot of geopolitical issues need to be considered. Then the second thing is resources efficiency.
Liu Dongquang from Taiwan. Why can't we do something as simple and not necessarily technologically? You know, there are all these cities that are developed in the world. It is a concrete jungle. How about if we were to put a lot of vines on the sides of the buildings and make the roofs green? That would certainly, one, eat up some of the CO2s, but certainly make it cooler too for the world.
Okay, another one. There's another one at the back. Yes.
谢谢主持人，我来自中国大陆，我叫王根礼。我提的问题是清洁的能源，地区的实质的。
In order to provide the cleanliness and the greenness energy for the APEC region, what is the time frame that we need, and what is the roadmap for that?
Time frame roadmap, which you all touched on a little bit. So we have to handle it very efficiently. Okay, first of all, Madam Prime Minister, geopolitics.
I was actually going to be slightly selective and choose the questions in the middle and leave some geopolitics for some of my counterparts. Look, there's no doubt this is an issue that needs to be on our regional agenda, and we must use the strength of our relationships within our region to continue these conversations, to share the technological innovation, some of which is being shared from the floor today. But on the question of human behaviour, I absolutely agree. Governments, political leadership can take us so far, but so much of the adaptation and mitigation actually comes down to our individual behaviour change as well. So bringing civil society with us is incredibly important, and that includes embedding some of these issues into our education system. And I'll give you an example. In New Zealand, we're creating a climate challenge for school-aged children so that they themselves can engage in these issues and not simply assume that all of the solutions that we have will simply sit within central government. And on the issue of green planting, adaptation and mitigation will include a range of options and solutions. Urban centres, yes, absolutely will be looking to options like that. I certainly know in New Zealand we have a huge amount of marginal land. We'll be looking to take the simple action of simply planting trees. We can mitigate a huge amount of our emissions profile simply by that simple act.
Well, I could certainly notice your empathy and approachable style as you have demonstrated during the campaigns just now for answering questions. Mark, do you want to take some of those questions? And also Rob, later?
Yeah, maybe just comment on,
and Madam Huong,
on the ESG component. I think the delegate raised the issue around there. I think it's about setting high standards and being ambitious, even though if they're beyond our reach today. So it's about setting standards and having the commitment to reach them as well from a corporate perspective. In terms of green cities, the delegate from Taiwan, I thought was a great question. We're a property developer as well across the region. We have a number of sort of very prestigious buildings across the commercial centres.
Right.
As we build those, we try and use sustainable materials, and we get accreditation for that. So I think we all have our part to play. In terms of raising public awareness, as the Prime Minister has just said, it's very important in everything we do to make sure that there's an education component as well.
Okay.
I wanted to come back to the question of technology. You know, this is not an easy problem to solve. We have a society that is based upon hydrocarbons. I'm guessing with almost none exceptions, everybody in this room flew here. Last time I looked, that's a hydrocarbon-based activity. But technology will be the solution. We currently spend about $1 billion a year researching technologies, and it'll be the solution in two ways. One is a breakthrough. That could happen. We're working on those kinds of things. But equally important, technology is what drives efficiency. Efficiency drives wealth, and wealthier societies can deal with this problem a lot more easily than poor societies.
We hope that will be the case. And with that, we are wrapping up this very first panel for the morning. As we have a lot of wonderful ancient cultures here in the Asia-Pacific region, a lot of wisdom to borrow from our history. I also learned a little bit from our history. The key to growth is the introduction of a higher dimension of consciousness into our awareness. I guess what we are doing today is exactly that, and also the solutions. With that, thank you so much, the four panelists with us. Thank you so much for sharing with us your insights and your solutions. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone as well.